the auditor who works with the Financial Secretary will be looking at these matters. When it starts, I'm not clear. There may have been some done already, but it's a question we can put the Financial Secretary and provide an answer. Our plan is not to make a proposal to politicians to adapt the pound-a-day scheme or the holiday credit scheme. There'll be an alternative proposal coming forward that supports domestic tourism and provides some sort of discount or voucher system rather than try and sort of bend the pound-a-day holiday credit scheme. We've had initial discussions with accommodation operators, with the Tourist Board and the Association about how that might work. And given we've made these decisions around quarantine and the visitor permitting issues, we've now got authority by members to go off and work those things through over the next few weeks. We could have went off in a darkened room and came up with a whole range of ideas without talking to the industry, the sector and operators. We've chosen not to do that. That's what we're going to do over the next 2 weeks. That'll all be part of the package that was referred to earlier. That'll go to Exco in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we undertook 2 days of antibody testing at MPC in July. A total of 324 tests were taken. Of the 324 tests, 10 were returned positive. And to clarify they were 10 new positives. We'd already antibody tested the people who were on island who tested COVID positive originally back in April. So this is 10 new cases, 10 new positive cases. Only 2, it would appear, were actually on the islands in March and April. So the other 8 were people who've arrived into the islands who almost certainly picked up their COVID in the United Kingdom, because all of the people who were positive had flown in from the UK from May onwards. So it's very unlikely that they were antibody, they caught COVID here. So only 2 additional COVID antibody positive people were sort of gathered up in that group of 324. We're looking at the data in a bit more detail to hammer down through it to see, of the 324 cases samples that we took, how many of those were here in March and April this year, and I haven't got that detail for you yet. We're sort of working through that, filling in the spreadsheet, and we'll have a little bit more detail around that, so we'll have an idea. But it's very interesting talking to Public Health England about these results, and I think it's very important. There's a few important points to make. One, the antibody response to COVID, globally, there are lots of studies going on, and it is a bit crazy. Some people who've had no symptoms of COVID whatsoever have a very strong antibody response, and they were unaware that they had COVID at all. Indeed, some of the 10 that we had here were very surprised to receive a positive result and had no idea at all that they'd been exposed to COVID. Some people who've been really quite unwell with the disease and have had confirmed COVID on swab seem to have no antibody response at all. They're also seeing in the longitudinal studies some people getting waxing and waning results. So they have an antibody response and then it dies off, and then it comes back again, and then it dies off. So it's just a little bit bonkers. But it was very helpful for us, because the reason to undertake a general screening, to have a snapshot look at the population at MPC, particularly trying to target the long stay community, was to have an idea if there is any sort of immunity in the community at MPC, and the results show there is not. So if COVID was to arrive again tomorrow, we would follow the same policies and procedures anyway, but from a health perspective, it would have been nice to have thought that perhaps we had some degree of immunity already within our community. We do not. We've had very few. We've only had 1 other positive antibody test in the local community, which makes 2 now. We've had 2 positive antibody results in the local community. So we're not sitting on a nice comfortable position of immunity to COVID. So there are some standard directions that have been approved by the Governor to do with MOD personnel, Crown servants flying in who have already pre-quarantined in the United Kingdom. We're happy that the pre-quarantining process is robust and it is fine for these individuals to be exempt on arrival. That's been approved. I can't tell you what the numbers are that fly in, but that's a pre-arranged agreement that we've looked at in detail and we're happy that it's safe. We've had to date 3 exempted individuals who have arrived on the air bridge who are civilians who are working for either the Falkland Islands government or undertaking other vital work that needs to be happening in a time-sensitive manner. And although they may be exempt, they are not exempt to the extent that they can wander around freely. They are subject to regular swabbing, testing. They have to wear masks and gloves at all times, and when they're not at their place of work, they must quarantine in their registered accommodation. That is a decision for the MOD. If they choose to continue pre-quarantining a section of their troops coming out, that is their decision to make. If they decide to stop the pre-quarantining, they will just have to quarantine their people when they arrive into the islands. So that's a decision for MOD. What our regulations say is that if you have arrived before 9 o'clock in the morning, so say you arrive on a Monday and you are in your recognised accommodation by 6 o'clock in the morning, you can be released the following Monday 2 weeks on. If you arrive after 9 o'clock in the morning, you will not be released until 2 weeks on the Tuesday following. So it's actually a minimum of 14 days in quarantine or closer to 15 days in some cases, depending on when the flight gets in. You have to draw a line in the sand somewhere.
I mean, the main thing we did with farmers is we dealt with the income issue, and because of the wool clip sales issue, both the value and the inability to sell wool at that point in time. We have got no plans to repeat that in the following season. We have got plans to work with on storage and other decisions around that, but at this stage we've got no plans at all to do that. There are a number of wool growers and agents selling wool at the moment. So I know that FLH has continued to sell wool, at a price that's obviously not at the highs of last season. So we don't want to close the door on the ability to sell wool. We don't want to end up with a mountain of wool in the Falkland Islands in 4 or 5 years' time. Having said that, we'll obviously keep this thing under review, but I think most wool growers will be thinking about how next year they'll be able to actually get their material into the market and sell their wool. Mm-hmm. And that's what we will be encouraging people to do. Well, most of it's stored in the wool warehouse, or it's stored in Bradford in the UK, so that's principally where it is at the moment. One of the things we have to think about is the new season. So, as we come to September and we begin to see shearing starting again, where's the storage going to be, beyond that point? And we've looked at what those options are, and we're confident that we'll be able to provide additional storage on island, by rationalising what we do. There are farms who have storage on their farms themselves, particularly FLH and others, and there is also room and other warehousing in Stanley that can be deployed if necessary to be able to deal with that new wool clip that will come into the system. I think this is a matter for future consideration, but do not rely on this measure being repeated again. There may be other measures to support people, but we don't want to end up with 3 or 4. This could continue for a while, so
they're not really going to rely on it, are they?
Well, we need people to deal with the economics of the situation. If they can sell the wool, they should sell the wool at a reasonable price, and they'll make those individual decisions. Both the inbound, there was a few inbound, and all of the outbound passengers paid their fare. When the reason for the repatriation flight is that we had a number of people who ran out their work permits, didn't have any work, and were creating a dependency on our services, and it was important to try and get them home for humanitarian reasons, as well as for other reasons as well. When we began planning this flight, we were thinking about a payload of over 40 passengers. Ultimately, it was 30 passengers. The passengers paid about £560 each for that one-way flight. There is a small shortfall between what was paid, because the plans were based on a payload of 40 passengers. We ended up with 30. And there were reasons why the difference of 10 fell away, because there were visa problems and border issues elsewhere in South America. So the right thing to do was to get them out of the country, to get them back to their families and back to their homes. It was the right thing to do from a humanitarian point of view, and it was the right thing that we didn't hold on to a group of people that would pose a burden to our health services, education services, housing, and potentially into welfare support as well. So the case was made, and we arranged the flight. So there's a shortfall, but the prices that were agreed with those passengers were based on 40, but that number declined as we began to work through the permitting and the visa arrangements and so on. We're considering whether or not we can bring forward some level of capital investment in projects that might have taken us longer otherwise. So in other words, bring them forward as a sort of capital investment priority. And there'll be a range of things, I guess, we might think about, including supporting, working with a museum, for example, to advance their proposed projects, and there are various other ideas as well that might come forward. Again, we haven't got a definitive list at the moment, because we're talking to the sector about what those things might be. And the plan is to try and use next year, it would be a reasonably fallow year in terms of the level of tourism activity. Let's use that year to plan for 21, 22 and beyond, and demonstrate a level of confidence and investment in the tourism industry, not just in support grants and the sort of triage that we provide to businesses to make sure that they're able to bounce back next year, but also some level of acceleration of some of the capital schemes that might have been considered in the past.
Montes Alpha M, extremely limited in production, perfectly balanced, full-bodied and voluptuous. Montes Wines at Stanley Services.
This one has had an awful lot of discussion and debate, and it is being reviewed. You know, the system we have in place appears to be working, but you know there is work being done to see what further can be tightened up, and that will continue.
Yeah, I'm following discussions with MLAs, with the Attorney General's office, exploring whether or not we can strengthen the regulations further, and I think Betty's probably been involved in some of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the next review for the quarantine regulations is the 17th of August. That's by law. The regulations have to be reviewed every 42 days, so the 42nd day is the 17th of August. So we will look and prepare something to present as to whether or not there needs to be any change. It might be that the regulations don't actually have to change, but that we can put other measures around the quarantine process to make it more robust and to give the public confidence. Perhaps some exit swabbing, so people coming out of quarantine might be swabbed, or perhaps the people who are quarantining with families who are still going to work or school, we might swab the family midway through the quarantine process. These are discussions that are to be had and to be thought through, and plans that need to be developed. One thing I will say though is that quarantine will always rely on people to do the right thing. You cannot regulate or legislate for idiots, and if people are going to breach quarantine, then there is nothing any of us can do about that. Yes, you have the force of the law to prosecute behind them, but that actually won't help if the quarantine has been breached. So I think it's much more about reinforcing the message, letting people understand how they can quarantine safely, and if they do share a property, how they can do that well and safely, and then putting in place other layers to mitigate that risk around testing the rest of the household. We have got two testing platforms, an open and a closed PCR platform. So our open PCR platform, which is the big testing where we can run sort of 80 at a time if we have to, and that takes a few hours for the results to come through, and is a lot more labour intensive, is the one we use most often. And then we do have a closed PCR testing platform, which is very easy to use. You literally shove the swab up someone's nose and shove it into the machine. We can only run 4 tests at a time with that one, and each test takes just over an hour. So we can do both, but obviously we're not going to be doing our mass screening on the quick turnaround one. But it is very helpful to have the quick turnaround testing platform for people, for example, if they're coming off fishing ships with fever and we need to make sure, is this COVID or actually is it just a bug? We will use that testing platform. So I think it's no secret, and anyone who watches the news or has been looking at the World Health Organization website can see that the global cases are rising. The curve is going up. It is not levelling off yet. So worldwide there are increasing cases on a daily basis. Worldwide there are increasing deaths on a daily basis. So COVID is still all around us and growing. South America is going through its own crisis. I think we are aware that the results out of South America may be underreported. For example, Mexico's got quite a significant problem at the moment. They seem to be on the upside of their curve at the moment. And we know that not everybody can easily access tests in many parts of South America. So most of the positive results that have come through are in hospitalised patients or patients attending clinics. So South America continues to have a problem. Chile in particular is probably just gone over the top of their curve, and their cases are levelling off, but they're certainly not coming down quickly the other side yet, but they are levelling off. So there needs to be a period of time where the world watches and sees if Chile can now see decreasing levels of cases. So South America is still probably on the front side of its curve, the first side of its curve, and of course in Europe we're seeing the suggestion of second waves coming. Whether they're little ripples or whether or not they're massive tsunamis is yet to be seen, and I suspect the little ripples will continue for many months until a vaccine is developed, if a vaccine is developed.
We've got a very clear list of those that are permitted and who aren't permitted, and beyond that, visitor permits won't be issued. The visitor list will not include tourists. Doesn't and will not do. Our plan is for this position to be our position until the 31st of December. The reason that we review it every month is because the regulations, are established to allow us to do that. And in fact, it would be the wrong thing not to keep abreast of what's happening in changing circumstances. I think the press release that we put out earlier puts that into context. If I was in the tourism sector here, I would not be planning to see tourists on island before the end of the 31st of December. But people have asked us to give them confidence about what to help them with their planning horizons and their planning decisions, and that's what we've tried to do. The reason that we continue to review these things, I think the visitor and quarantine varies. I think one's 42-day review and 30-day review, is because this is quite a big decision. It's quite a big decision to deprive people of their liberty and choices and livelihoods. So we should rightly keep it under review on a regular basis. But we've been asked to give an indication that's more long term to allow people to plan properly. And I think it is clear about what we believe is the position. We have talked to various other institutions elsewhere to get some advice as well, but IATO is probably the main one that we refer to, and of course talking to the tourist board, who have various advisors who have international knowledge, and there's a whole sort of bank of information from various institutions across the world commenting on, advising on what we predict to be a very poor season for tourism, as we've set out earlier. We have not received any proposals from any cruise operator for any operation in the Falkland Islands at this point in time. If we get something, we'll review it, and members and the government will consider whether or not it can be done. But I can assure you that nothing will be considered that it would be unsafe. But we have no proposals at all from any cruise operator at the moment. If there were proposals from small cruise operators, we would consider it, but it would have to be a safe proposal, i.e. contactless cruising or whatever, where there's no human contact at all, and we've seen these various things proposed across the world. The whole industry is in chaos. They're beginning to try and think about how they can operate safely generally. We haven't had a proposal, and what I'm saying to them is, if there's a proposal from a particular operator, come and talk to us about it and we'll listen to it. But we haven't seen anything yet. And it would be, I think it's the right thing to do to remain open-minded, but this would have to be done in the context of the decisions that were made about visit permitting for tourists and our quarantine arrangements. And if we go back a bit, several months, probably to March, when we helped with the repatriation of passengers from cruise vessels. We did that very safely. It didn't pose a significant risk. These are things that we've learned from. But until we get a proposition, we're not courting, if you like, proposals from the cruise industry.